All right, just waiting for a few more of y'all to get in here. As you guys caught me on this Wednesday, or not even Wednesday. Dang, I about to said that wrong. On this Tuesday, as a lot of stuff that's happening in our world right now. So I'm gonna give you guys a minute or so before you all can join me. Hopefully, just giving y'all a couple more seconds. Hopefully, y'all will start filing in, and I can see some of the stuff you dropping in the chat. And while we're here, just feel free to ask me whatever, because I have a lot of thoughts about what has happened to my dear friend, Joyanne Reid, who, as many of you know, she her show, The Readout, was canceled by MSNBC recently. Yesterday was the last show, so I hope a whole lot of you were able to watch it, support Joy, and more importantly, support Joy for how she moves forward, because this is going to be a key component in all of this. But, I've known Joy for years. She's been an incredible, is not been, I don't mean to say that in past tense, but she's an incredible person who, for those of us who are in broadcasting, Joy has been like the gold standard. I think when I first met Joy, she was still a contributor to MSNBC. She didn't have her own show yet. And I think I met her because she used to do Melissa Harris Perry's show, another one who was an MSNBC casualty. And so I met her during that time, and I just liked her right away, and we just always clicked. And to see her kind of rise and go through all of this, to go from being a contributor to having her own show and being one of the few Black people in primetime cable news, that was a big deal. And so, her show meant a lot to all of us. It was aspirational. It was informative. I mean, she's one of the smartest people on TV. I think that goes without saying. But, right now, this is a very scary time for media. It's a very scary time for Black media in general. And, the reason that it is, just before I joined you guys, I saw that that the White House will now be picking the reporters and outlets who will be covering them. Now, just for you, those of you who are not familiar, this goes against a long-standing tradition where the White House Press Corps Association, they democratically pick those who will serve, those who will be allowed, to cover the White House once they're assigned from that particular outlet. And so, they take a huge sample of different outlets. You have outlets that are conservatives. You have all different types of media outlets, and this is probably the way that it should be done. The White House shouldn't get to pick who covers them. One of the core tenets of a democracy is a free press, and so when we don't have a free press, we basically become state-owned media, or we become stenographers. That's not the role. That's not what journalists do. And given the fact that during his first time in office, and just period throughout his political career, Donald Trump has made it very known about his feelings about the media. He was the one that called us the enemy of the state. And I get it. Like, a lot of people don't trust the media. I think it's trust that we have in large part earned. But at the same time, once he put that label on the media, or rather the media he doesn't like, that then the public then saw us as much more oppositional than I can remember the public seeing us throughout my entire journalism career. And so that alone, carrying that label of being the enemy of the state, people don't understand, like, how on a day-to-day basis, how journalism has basically largely functioned to improve all of our lives. Do you know how many scandals and things you wouldn't know about if it weren't for journalists, or how many questions that wouldn't be asked? I mean, our role as journalists is to hold the powers that be accountable. And again, I'm not pretending that we have done that job as well as we should have. And particularly in this moment, we have largely failed a lot of people. We have largely failed the public in general. And I think that that was very clear during this election season. It's been clear for a while. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But with Joy in particular, as being somebody who was one of Donald Trump's most vocal critics, as someone he has singled out many times, it's hard for those of us who understand how things work behind the scenes. It's hard for us to see that, to not see the relationship between those two things. And so, people like to point to like ratings and all these kind of things. And ratings matter. I'm not pretending that ratings don't matter. What keeps you on TV is if you can get ratings. But just so people know about ratings and about MSNBC in particular, I think it was the last quarter of last year, MSNBC had its highest ratings of the year. Joy's show was a big part of that. Her show was averaging 1.4 million viewers in 2024. Naturally, in an election year, there is always a huge bump in ratings, all right? Because most people, and especially as you get closer to the election, a lot of people want to be informed. They're trying to figure out what the issues are. They're trying to figure out what is the information they need. So a lot of people's ratings in politics, in news media, they tend to skyrocket during this particular time. And conversely, when the election is over, and some of that does depend on who won. When the election is over, ratings tend to dip. And so Joy's show, along with a lot of MSNBC programming, and not just at MSNBC, also at CNN, at other outlets, the programming isn't drawing the same number of eyeballs as it did during the election. Now, of course, this was a little bit different for Fox, and just so people are clear, Fox is the number one cable news network. There's a lot of reasons for that. Very interesting that the same place that had to pay nearly $1 billion for lying to his viewers is the number one most watched cable news network, which should tell you a whole lot about misinformation, disinformation, and how the trafficking of that and why it's so dangerous. If most people are watching Fox, at least in the linear TV game, to get their news, what does that tell you? And especially knowing their long history of lying to their viewers, just straight up lying, propaganda, just digging into all the culture wars. That tells you everything about where we are in America. And so I say all that to say it's just hard for me to believe that the decision to cancel Joy's show was about ratings, especially given what her track record was and just all of the hard work and everything she had done with that time slot and with that show. And what is happening now in this moment is that for a lot of Black journalists, especially those of us who work for mainstream publications, mainstream media outlets, and realize it was Black journalists who, when Trump's political career really started going, because he's now been a central political figure for it's been a decade, if not like a hair or two longer. It was Black journalists who immediately called him out. It was Black journalists that surfaced, the racial allegations that were against him in housing in New York, that surfaced the Central Park Five, ad that he took out about the Central Park Five in the New York Times, calling for their execution. And it was a lot of us that were raising questions about his character and who he was. And now that he's in this position, you see the capitulation that overall media is doing. And as somebody who dedicated their career to this profession, this is, disheartening doesn't even begin to cover it. This is heartbreaking to see because that's not what journalists do. It's like we're supposed to be disruptors. We're supposed to, as we used to say in journalism school, our job is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That's what we're supposed to do. And seeing us not do that, and not only that, bend the knee, it is just it's just really tough to take. And of course, in this moment, a lot of people, and especially a lot of Black audiences or the Black audience is asking well, what does this mean? how can our issues and concerns be covered, in this larger media space? And the reality is that it is tough to do. I noticed that as soon, as all of this started, that a lot of you were like, you know, uh, why can't we just start our own? Why don't we just do our own? Hey, look, I'm all down for that. And I want to address that part of it, though. Like, why can't Black media have its own? If, as many of you know, Roland Martin, who has Roland Martin Unfiltered and the Black Star Network, that's something that he created. It's really quite remarkable in this media space to be able to create something like that. But that is not easy to do. And, Roland is a friend. We've had a ton of conversations about what his road is like over the years. And that's what makes me prouder of him, that he's been able to build that. Realize that when it comes to news, especially if you want news that serves the Black community, that is not in the top 10 list of things that advertisers want to do, right? And Roland has talked very candidly about what it's like for him to fight to get those same dollars that other media outlets, some of which don't even have the same following that he has. It's been a tough role for him to get. So the number one thing, if we are to create our own platforms, that we have to have is financing. It's backing. Over the last 24 to 48 hours, so many people have been like, why don't you, Roland, Don Lemon, naming the Avengers crew, or a ton of us. Why don't y'all get together and do your own thing? It's like, we need money to do that. And not only that, we not only need money to create something like that, we also need a certain amount of commitment from the audience. Years ago, I had a conversation with somebody who was at, BET at the time. And we had a conversation about why BET, if y'all remember, like I do, back in the day when they had the nightly news, when Ed Gordon, all of that, when they had news specials all the time. And this is when BET was truly Black owned. I think this is before Viacom came in the picture, and they had Teen Summit and other things that sort of tried to service multiple needs in the Black community. But as you notice, they got out of doing nightly news. And a lot of times people get out of doing nightly news, especially if you're networks like BET. And while certainly BET is not a fringe network, but it's a network that they're not going to have millions or more than that to blow on news coverage. They have to be very smart and very strategic about how they spend their money. And the truth of the matter is, especially if they're trying to attract advertisers to appeal to a certain demographic, advertisers, their key demo is 18 to 34. That's their sweet spot, right? Do 18 to 34-year-olds watch the news? 18 to 34-year-olds probably go to social media. A lot of people go to social media now. It's not just them. But that demographic, they're getting their information from TikTok. They're getting their information from a variety of places, especially in the digital space, if they're interested in news. So if you're BET and the way for you to attract these advertisers is to appeal to this particular group, you have to make a decision about whether or not it's worth it for you to spend millions of dollars on news coverage, when, to be honest, you could probably run reruns of Martin and make way more money, because running episodes of Martin is basically not going to cost you anything. So this is why it becomes a struggle, because a lot of people have been like, well, what about OWN, which is obviously Oprah Winfrey's network? What about Tyler Perry? Why don't they create something? Again, they understand the game, and I'm not knocking them for it, is that Black people, Black audiences over-index on entertainment. It's a reason you will actually, let me go back. You know what the number one source of news is for 18 to 34-year-olds Black audience? It's the Shade Room. The Shade Room has almost 30 million followers on Instagram. That is where people are getting their news. And so the truth of the matter is, if you're Tyler Perry, what is your incentive to invest in news when news is a hard sell to advertisers who want to connect with Black audiences, but they typically want to connect with Black audiences through entertainment, right? You know, that's why you see reality shows are over indexed. That's why, you know, things that are things that are more entertainment based tend to be over indexed, because this is where they can attract dollars. And so, you know, for all of you that are wondering and hoping that wondering and hoping about when and how we can cover our community, that is one of the main things that we are up against. And not to mention, there's a stereotype, a prevalent stereotype, that when you get in these C-suites and get in these pitch meetings, they really believe that Black people don't watch the news. That's just not something that we're committed, you know, to watching. And it's sad, but in some cases, they actually have data that will unfortunately support that belief. It's a terrible stereotype, and it's not true, because listen, I don't know about y'all, but I grew up in one of the Black households where my mama and my grandma watched the news every night. Okay, and you know, I think the issue is demographics. Is because, again, that key demo that they're trying to hit is not the one that's going to show up at 10 p.m. every night to watch the news. Because, you know, it's unfortunately a part of our society. You know, and by the way, you all in the chat, make sure and feel free to ask me any questions you might have, or, you know, we just gonna dialogue back and forth. I see P. Morton here said, I could roll with that explanation if OWN or TP had even made the attempt. It's deeper than that. I don't know that it is. Realize that, like, when you get to that particular level, like, your job is to keep money coming in. You know, it's a simple cost and benefit analysis. I'll give you a recent example. I don't know if you guys remember this, back in like 2022 or 2023. I think that it was called Black News Channel. It was backed by billionaire Shad Khan, who owns the Jacksonville Jaguars. And they started a 24-hour Black news network. It lasted, I don't think it even made it 2 years. One, it was creating awareness of the channel, which is tough to do. And by the way, they hired, because I know a ton of people they hired. I appeared on several shows, both as talent rather, but I know a ton of people that they hired both as talent, producers, executives, very talented people. And it didn't make it. Shad Khan decided, this is just not me worth blowing this kind of money. And unfortunately, there are far more examples of that than it is of examples of startup news organizations or startups in this vein actually surviving. And so it doesn't, I'm not trying to say that it's impossible, but it is not as simple as many of you all tend to say in the comments. Well, just start your own. It's not that simple. You know, let's see, Maurice Bishop says it's a weird spot because some of us also put the message out telling each other not to watch the news because it's overly biased. You're right. It is a double-edged sword because, again, when I talked about trust in the media, this trust in the media is something that we have earned. And, you know, in my career, especially early on, like, the complaints that the Black community had about the media were true. I'm not saying that they're not true now, but these are consistent complaints about the biased coverage of our community, about ignoring issues in our community. You know, it shouldn't have taken Ferguson for certain news outlets to suddenly start covering police misconduct as an actual beat. Should not have taken that, but it did, you know? And so there has been a long-standing sort of dearth of newspapers and media outlets covering the Black community and not just showing up when there's a murder and not just showing up to show the very worst of our community. So that trust that we don't have in the media has been absolutely earned. At the same time, some of us, and I'm gonna just speak for myself, but I can't speak for a few other journalists because we have these conversations behind closed doors. Like, let me just assure you all of this. The conversations you guys are having about, the media, about all the things that you do, we have those same conversations among each other. And a lot of us, we definitely, one of the reasons that we were inspired to get into the business is because we wanted to change that. We wanted to go into these mainstream spaces, and we wanted to be sure that we were represented, that our communities were covered with dignity, respect, and fairness. That's what we wanted to do. And, at times we won important battles behind the scenes. At times we did not. And don't get twisted. Like, a lot of times when the outlets that we work for committed what we consider to be egregious infractions against our communities inside the building, we were speaking up. I remember, I don't know how many of you guys remember this. This was years ago, when I was at ESPN, and ESPN caught hell, as they should have, because they did this skit about auction draft. It was right around when it was kickoff for the NFL season, and they were doing, huge coverage of fantasy football in terms of like trying to get more people to sign up for ESPN fantasy football. And any of you guys that play fantasy football, or women, auction drafts, are very popular. So they did an auction draft, like sort of I think it was a skit, or just generally just showing an example of what an auction draft was. And they used a black people who were employees at ESPN, not on air talent. I think these were mostly like producers. And they had us being auctioned. It is how an auction draft goes. Like, there's an auction for players, right? But the optics of black people being auctioned, do I need to tell y'all why that probably should that's in the wrong direction? And ESPN caught hell from a lot of black viewers who found that to be offensive, distasteful, disrespectful. And those of us inside the building were right with them. And so sometimes you don't necessarily see, we may not be public when we're in these mainstream spaces about, how we feel about something when it happens, in terms of telling you guys. But best believe it was many an email and many a meeting that took place after that whole auction shenanigans went down. And so, that was why a lot of us got into this business. It's like we wanted to be in position to try to change some of the narrative about our community that was in the mainstream. And so, it's problematic in this time to see that a lot of us who are in that ecosystem, are essentially being silenced or being pushed out, being disregarded, not supported. And I don't know, to some degree, you guys are like, oh, well, what do you expect? I mean, and that's fair, because, traditionally, these are not spaces, where we have been welcomed. But again, we thought the fight was definitely worth it. And I'm certainly not saying that, that's a more rewarding fight than trying to do something on our own. But what I am saying is that, like, that was always the thought process. And we've seen a lot of the progress that has been made just strictly by our presence, being there. When I hosted the 6 o'clock Sports Center, I'm pretty sure that our production staff had to be one of the blackest, because one thing that was immediately noticeable about Sports Center was that when once you got off of the front facing talent, you would probably see more diversity there than you would behind the scenes, in terms of who's making the coverage decisions, who's producing, who's doing research, everybody from the camera operator on down. Like, wasn't very diverse. Our staff, a lot different. We bring a lot more flavor to it, for sure. And so what I will say is that the communication that a lot of us are having behind the scenes is about how can we be protected in this moment. And we know that protection is not going to come from mainstream media in these places that we are. We know that for sure. And so we're trying to figure out ways about how we can collaborate, how we can work together. What's the next step? Because it can't keep going like this. That much we do know. And I don't want to make it seem like Black journalists are the only ones that are vulnerable in this moment. You saw CNN got rid of Jim Acosta. Or rather, I shouldn't say they got rid of him. They essentially forced him to quit. And he also was somebody who was a vocal critic of Donald Trump, and just in doing his job, like, realize that a lot of the criticism that is aimed at Trump is, at least as I'm speaking in this light, is criticism, one, he has earned, and criticism that is coming within the scope of what the job is supposed to be. So, to see, conversely, these, journalists who are very accomplished, very good journalists, being pushed out of their jobs, being silenced, or at least those that are still remaining being sent the message that you won't be supported. And it's the reason it's a really damning message. Like, coming up in journalism, there was like sort of a code that we live by. And granted, my path was a little different because I'm a print reporter. That was how my entry point into the business. I never wanted to be on TV. And the whole idea was like, you didn't let City Hall come after your reporters. Like, when it came to your reporters versus the establishment, you always stood 10 toes down for your reporters. It's not like that anymore. A lot of these media companies and outlets and platforms, just to ingratiate themselves with whoever is in power, they will throw their reporters under the bus, back over them, and then roll over them again. They will continue to do this. And so, what I would say, as we figure out ways that we can connect and collaborate, whoever are your favorite journalists, you need to support them. I mean, bottom line, because even like many of you are saying in the comments, we support you, which, we certainly all appreciate, or like in terms of starting your own. I don't know what Joy's plans are for next, but let's just say, as many of you suggested, that she create her own YouTube channel and kind of do what Don Lemon has done. And by the way, shout out to Don Lemon, because I believe he crossed 500,000 subscribers, and that's huge. I'm trying to get there. I'm the little engine that could. I'm at like 114,000 subscribers. So while y'all here, why don't y'all hit that subscribe button and help a sister out? At any rate, when she does decide to start her own, and not just her, but, we saw what happened with Tiffany Cross, same thing. Tiffany Cross, Angela Rye, and Andrew Gillum, they have a great podcast called Native Land Pod, also on YouTube. So hit the subscribe button there. The whole point is support your faves, support your favorite journalists, because when we're in these meetings and we're trying to prove value to why our voices should be maybe in some of these platform spaces, or even to get shows and to do our independent thing, we have to prove that we can build and maintain an audience. If we don't build and maintain an audience, they're not going to give us anything. And I can't, that's just kind of the way that it works. So for all of those who like, yeah, we're going to support, hit like, hit subscribe, like immediately. All right. Roland Martin, again, he's been doing this thing for a minute. Subscribe and donate, because that's the only way that some of us or our voices will be impactful. As it is, when we try to get in these spaces, especially in these mainstream spaces, like, they want to know how many social media followers you have, and, they want to know what's your audience. So, like, we do need to do a better job of supporting, especially in this time where, as you see, and not just in the media example, I mean, it wasn't that long ago where we were talking about Target and what was happening to a lot of, the Black business owners who have products in Target, and Target decided that they were going to eliminate their DEI. And I want people to understand, at least for me, it wasn't about them eliminating DEI. By now, I think you guys know that DEI doesn't mean just Black people. They just like to make it seem like it just means black people, because that's the way that they get people to turn against it. So we know what the game is. The game is not, DEI, especially at the federal level, means those that are disabled. It means veterans. It means women. It means a lot of the groups that are usually frozen out of opportunities. And this is DEI is the initiative that was created to make sure those who were frozen out were able to be considered qualified people. Let me just say again, qualified people to be considered for opportunities. And when Target decided to do that, it really put our community in an uncomfortable position, because of course we want to support the black retailers that are there. And many of us shopped at Target because they did have black retailers and they put them on display and were able to boost and amplify them. And once they did that, they were basically saying, we don't care about your community or your business, basically. I mean, and so it put us in a bad spot, because of course we want to show support, but we also don't want to be disrespected. And so, what I would say is that the reason that we wind up having to go to these mainstream places is because it is a little bit more challenging to galvanize support in our community. And I get it. Like, as black people, our bandwidth, it's a wonder that we don't wake up, every day and just fall down, because we got a lot that we have to deal with all the time. And we have a lot pulling on us, and we got a lot that we are just simply trying to survive. Every one thing we know how to do is weather a storm. But at times we get tired of always having to look for an umbrella or always trying to find the best shelter that we can. So, when I'm asking you for this support, I'm fully aware of the fact that you already got a lot on your plate. But, I don't know any other way in which we can still, maintain, a certain voice and a certain presence and a certain amount of dignity. I was like, I don't know any other way. And so, I think it's incumbent upon us in this moment where we're seeing our rights just erode before our eyes, or we're being sent a message on a minute by minute basis how much they don't want us to matter. It's important in this moment that we counter that by showing, yes, the fuck we do matter. And we here, and y'all not moving us anywhere. It's the unfortunate burden of us having to seek equality and liberation in the same country that oppressed us. This is the burden on it. And so, I just hope you all in these moments are just staying strong and, trying to keep our head above water, trying to stay afloat, because I know it's a scary time. But we truly, all we do have is each other. And, I've always felt like I've been intentional about, supporting black businesses, black folks, just our whole ecosystem as a whole. But now it's like, it's real in the field, because I think that's really the only way we're going to be able to get through this. And so anyway, I thank you all for joining me. I actually didn't intend, kind of to talk this long, but I just felt like with all the anxiety, all the questions, with what happened to Joy, that we just, I just really had some things that I needed to air out and get off my chest. But for sure, make sure that you seek out, black journalists and black media to support. I know a lot of people, especially when we're talking about digital media, like you click on a newspaper, and it's like asking you to subscribe, and you get annoyed. The reason why is because that work deserves support. Like, quality journalism is expensive. I don't know how many of you, just to give you an example, I don't know how many of you used to watch the show Real Sports that was on HBO. Great show, came on once a month. Brian Gumble was the host. Some in-depth, powerful sports journalism was done. That's a show that costs well into six figures per show. That's a lot of money. So you know, it doesn't, it's not cheap. Journalism is not cheap. And it's not just about paying the talent, but just what it costs to operate quality journalism. It's expensive. And so, you know, I know everybody's oversubscribed to everything. And, you know, some months wondering, like, how many different subscriptions do you have? I get it. But the only way this democracy can work is if it's a free press. And Black journalists, the tradition of Black media, you know, is something that deserves to be preserved. Remember, at one time in the country, basically every state, every major city, all had Black newspapers. And you see what happened. And some of it was technology, but some of it was also the fact that our community, we didn't continue to support and know that there's a much different perspective on coverage when it's in the Chicago Defender versus when it's on CNN. And so we need to make sure that we're preserving these Black media institutions, because that's all what we have. You know, right here, I'm in my office right now, and this is Ida B. Wells, right? This is the Ida B. Wells Barbie. If you haven't cop one, go get one. I have that close to me because I think about Ida B. Wells, the fact that she risked her life to report on lynching, report on how the Black community was being racially terrorized. And she did that at a time where it wasn't no wealth in that. It wasn't any money in that. And so, but she made it because she had the support of the community. Because the community, once they saw that she was willing to risk it so that people could understand the horrors that were happening to our people, you know, that's what made her A1. And so that's why we need you all support. Anywho, I'm going to end this live now. Thank y'all for hanging out with me. I plan to do these a little bit more so I can continue to boost these channel. Again, look for Black media, Black journalists, support them in mainstream spaces. You know, support them in Black media spaces, support them in Black owned media spaces. Because the first thing they're quick to do is, when we can't prove an audience, is use that to say we don't deserve to be here. So we're going to make sure that they a lie, that the devil is a lie. Anyway, y'all be easy and take care.